You're listening to the Becoming More Me podcast with me, Theresa Lear Levine. You're already enough. But if you're anything like me, you thrive when you're stretching and developing yourself, creating more of the person you feel called to be. This podcast is here to inspire and support you. Let's release the negative, reinforce the positive, and elevate our vibe together as we tap into our limitless potential to transform and grow. Hey. Welcome to another episode of Becoming More Me. I want to talk today about our nervous system because, I remember when I did a first episode on my high functioning anxiety, and I was like, man, I really should have shared about this before. Like, it's such a part of me that it just kind of seemed like people would know I had it. But you know what? There was a time that I didn't know I had it. There was a time that I had no idea what it was. And so through sharing that, I know I've gotten so much feedback on that episode that it was really what people needed to hear, or that they really felt like they saw themselves in it. And so for that reason, I want to kind of get a little, what I guess would consider basic today, and talk about the nervous system, because I think a lot of times when I am talking about emotional freedom techniques or tapping, it is not understood that it is bringing together both the psychological and the physical aspects at the same time. It is regulating the nervous system and also releasing things with the psychological work that's done during it. But I don't think a lot of people understand why that's important or how that helps them. So I just wanted to kind of do some basic, just kind of teaching and understanding and some examples about how and why the nervous system is so important. So just at the basic level, the nervous system transmits signals between the brain and the rest of the body. This includes your internal organs, and that activity controls your ability to move, your ability to breathe, to be able to, visualize, to see things, to think, and so much more. And in basic units, our nervous system is nerve cells or neurons. So that it does a lot for us. And I also want you to understand, and you can look this up if you want, but the idea of the stress bucket. So, a lot of times people come to me and they have this, generalized anxiety, maybe showing up from different things, or maybe they're not sure why, or they have a couple of issues. I normally ask a lot of different questions. And sometimes it's like, well, why is all of this, relevant? But there's so many things that go into our day-to-day stress. And it could be our work. It could be our life at home. It could be physical injuries, old or new, that we're recovering from. It could be health. Maybe we're sick, like myself. I'm recovering from this double eye infection. And that was definitely a nervous system thing for me, being like, hey, T, it's time to shut it down a little bit. Time to pull back. Time to give yourself the rest that you sometimes don't give yourself enough of, and to heal. And my body letting me know that it needed that time and that effort on my part to be able to feel its best. And it was actually a great time for me to work on my own self-judgment, to work on my own self-love, and to just pour into me guilt-free. So things like our workload add to our stress. Things like illness, like I mentioned, any kind of negative feedback, conflict, uncertainty, which is a certain part of our life. There's very little that is certain. So depending on how we deal with uncertainty, that can definitely increase our stress. Sometimes we have deadlines. So we know that something's approaching and we apply pressure to ourselves as that deadline gets closer. Money. Financial worries can be a big stressor for a lot of people. People pleasing can be a stressor. If you're worried about letting people down, that can often stress people out. And sleep, or lack thereof, more so. All of those things can really fill your metaphorical stress bucket. So at some point, the bucket needs to release some stress. So imagine the bucket has a spigot on it. And, if that's working well, then the spigot is going to help you to deal with those things, to release some pressure, kind of like a pressure valve. Maybe you learn to better manage your emotions. Maybe you make some better choices. Maybe some other things come into play that allow you to release a little bit. That can definitely be helpful. And it's also important to understand that our own state of well-being and mental health affect the capacity that the bucket has in the first place. So you can handle a lot more if you're well-regulated. You can handle a lot less if you're not managing with these things. So the nervous system becomes a very important part of our healing. So let's say, for example, that you sprained your wrist, and just to make it a little easier on you, I'll make it your non-dominant wrist. So if you're right-handed, you sprained your left wrist. If you're left-handed, you sprained your right wrist. But maybe you never actually went through physical therapy or whatever the doctor said needed to be done in order to help it be restored properly. And so your brain's map of your wrist gets a little bit blurry. So your brain understands where your different body parts are in space. And that's your proprioceptive system that maps your body. And it allows you to know where you are in space. So if your wrist has gotten a little bit off base with the way that your brain maps it, then every time that you use that wrist to pick something up or what have you, then it's like it's a threat to your brain, because your brain wants to be able to predict where your wrist is, what it's doing, be able to, do all the things that are necessary for you to stay safe, to stay alive, all of that. So it becomes a threat. And that input is coming in and it's not clear to our brain. So the brain is feeling a little bit threatened all of the time. And so that stress goes into your bucket. And that's why it's so important to think about the things that aren't feeling quite right in your body and how those can be rehabilitated. Because even though those seem like a little thing, oh yeah, so my wrist feels a little bit off and, whatever, it'll get better in time. And it will, it will. But whatever you can do to maximize your health at any given time and to maximize you feeling good, which is always the most important thing. Your own alignment, your own vibrational harmony is always the most important thing. So whatever you can do to maximize that is going to help you to not fill up your bucket and get to the point of something trying to kind of shut you down for your own safety. And so again, we're thinking about that nervous system as a bucket. And all of that stress is going in there. So not just the stress from your wrist, but also the money stress. And, maybe there's some strain on, a relationship with a significant other, spouse, a child, a parent, whatever, life stress, your work stress, those deadlines that are coming. And all of those are rising that water level within your bucket. And all of those are sending signals that are, threatening to your brain. So thankfully, we have very resilient bodies. We are very lucky that that is the case, because we do put them through a lot. And they're smart, smart and resilient, thank you, body. But in that intelligence, in that resilience, the body also understands that when we have that much stress and that much stuff that is not healthy for the body going on, that it could lead to something much worse. Disease, sickness, issues with your mental health. There's a lot of ways that it could get worse. Your brain sees that. And again, the brain wants to protect us. So it's going to try to create some kind of an output so that we change, so that we do something about this mess that's causing it to feel like there's worse things coming. So let's just say you have all that stress that I mentioned. That water level is going up in your bucket. And of course, there's also, the wrist. You haven't gotten that taken care of. That's still, acting up and bothering you and sending threats to your brain. There's probably other little things too that you haven't taken into account. But, sometimes if we have a cold or something, our respiration, the way that we breathe can be affected. And that means literally that every breath sends a signal that we're threatened because it's not quite right. And all of that is building up. The water level's rising. And the brain, the nervous system, they do not want your bucket to overflow. So they're going to use that spigot to release some of that stress and some of that water. And that is where the outputs are going to come out. So that is where your brain wants you to change your behavior. It's looking for you to find ways to be safer than it feels you are at the moment. And interestingly enough, pain is a very, very common output that we get in these cases. And it seems almost counterintuitive because it's like, oh, pain, that's going to add more stress and everything else. But it's actually great from the brain's point of view, because if you're in pain, let's say, you suddenly have all this like back pain or something, you're not going to want to go out and do much because moving isn't going to feel good. You're going to interact less as a result of that. You might move a little bit less because movements don't feel good. And that way you won't have as much stimulus coming in if you're limiting all of those things. So the brain sees that as a great way to get your attention on doing less. And headaches, migraines are also another output that a lot of people deal with. Because, gosh, I used to suffer from migraines before I knew how to regulate myself a lot for many years. And I say that with a sigh because it's like, oh, man, unnecessarily. If I knew then what I know now. But, I think we all go through our experiences for reasons that are important to our journey. And that's no exception. But when we have a really bad headache or a migraine, then what do we need to do? Like, I don't know about you, I could be in the middle of almost anything. And if I were to get a migraine, everything stops. I'm like, okay, where's the ice pack? I'm going to go find the darkest place in my house, make my bedroom dark and, put a eye mask on and just be until this passes, because it's so painful and so debilitating. But it requires you to block out all of the stimulus. And that rest is what your nervous system needs, because it's just been threat after threat after threat. So let's just say, for instance, that little wrist injury that you're thinking isn't a big deal, if you're able to rehab that with things that are going to like nervous system training, which is a whole other podcast episode. But if you're able to rehab that with some different drills that help with the proprioceptive system, then you can also you can make that better, and that threat level goes down. And that's something that you can manage like day by day. And there's a lot of other things that are in the bucket that are kind of, you can't manage them as easily. But something like that, you can do things to help manage, minute by minute, day by day. And those deficits can then help the level in your bucket to go down. So even though all those other stresses and deadlines and money stuff and relationship stuff and all of that still exists, you have more room in your bucket. You have a greater capacity before overflow, and then you don't have as many negative outputs. So the more things you can manage that seem even like minuscule or like, this isn't really the big thing, they still really, really matter overall, because they allow you to be able to handle more stress from life. The stuff that's just not going to stop no matter what you do. There's a lot of ways that we can learn to handle the stress from those things that aren't going to stop, but those things are still going to come, and we're going to need to manage them when they do. But we can handle more stress from life when we mitigate those little threats that might not seem very important until you start looking at the bigger picture. And when you do that, when you can handle more, that's when all of a sudden you're able to do more in your life. You're able to show up better in your marriage or your relationships. You're able to parent better. You're able to level up with your business. You're able to explore new things, change your habits, work on you, and really, really heal in a new way because you've created room for it. So I just wanted to explain that today at that level, because resolving those different deficits and being able to regulate better really, really makes a difference. And it just, I don't know how else to say it other than that. It just, when you're under less threat, you can have a much more awesome life. And it doesn't necessarily take a whole lot to be able to get some water out of the bucket and start feeling way better about where you are, and have that room to have that less stressful life that just has more ease and more room for you to be who you want. Again, to become more of the person that you want to be. And that's what it's all about, right? So I hope that helped. I hope, having some examples and understanding that the nervous system has a big role in this. And this is just one way. There's so much more to talk about, but I just wanted to kind of scrape the surface, because I know the last few weeks I've been using the stress bucket example with a lot of my clients, and it's a really basic thing. And some of them are like, oh yeah, cool, I understand the stress bucket, I've heard of that before. And others are like, wow, I've never thought of it that way. And I was like, I really need to do an episode on this and have people understand, the way that the nervous system handles all of these threats that it's bombarded with, the way our brain processes it, and how when we are in pain and we are experiencing these things, we need to be aware. We need to be conscious. We need to understand what's going on so that we can create a different outcome in the future, making use of the data that our brain and our body are giving us to advance towards our goals and our highest self. Pretty cool, right? Thanks for listening, guys. Have an awesome day.
Thanks so much for listening. If you loved this episode, please share it with a friend or post on social media and tag me so I can personally connect and thank you. Until next time, keep taking bold and brave action steps towards becoming more of who you want to be in this world. You are capable, you are worthy, and you are enough. Keep shining your light.